dear friend, as I sit here in the pre-dawn silence of our monastery, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce through the ancient oak trees, I'm reminded of a question that has haunted humanity for millennia. It's a question that brought you here today, isn't it? The question that makes some people uncomfortable, others defensive, and still others profoundly curious. Why don't Buddhists believe in God? But before we dive into this ocean of understanding, let me share something that happened just yesterday morning during our meditation. A young visitor approached me, his face etched with confusion, and what I could only describe as spiritual anxiety. "Venerable sir," he whispered, "I've been studying Buddhism for months, but I'm terrified. If I don't believe in God, will I lose my soul? Will I become empty inside?" His eyes held the fear that so many carry, the fear that without God, there is only darkness, only meaninglessness. As I looked into his troubled eyes, I saw reflected there the same confusion that grips millions of sincere seekers around the world. They've been told that spirituality requires a divine creator, that enlightenment is impossible without surrendering to a supreme being, that the very foundation of meaning rests upon the existence of God. But what if I told you that this very belief, this desperate clinging to the idea of a creator, might be the very thing preventing you from experiencing the deepest spiritual truths? The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, made a choice that was revolutionary, scandalous, and ultimately liberating. When pressed about the existence of God, of a supreme creator, of an eternal divine being who governs the universe, he chose something that philosophers call noble silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of profound wisdom. He recognized that this very question, this obsession with whether God exists or not, was leading people away from the one thing that truly mattered, the ending of suffering. You see, in the Buddha's time, just as in ours, people were consumed with theological debates. They would spend hours, days, years arguing about the nature of the divine, about creation myths, about whether the gods were benevolent or indifferent. And while they debated, they continued to suffer. While they theorized about the ultimate nature of reality, they remained trapped in cycles of anxiety, fear, anger, and despair. The Buddha saw this with crystalline clarity, but he recognized that asking, "Does God exist?" is like a man struck by a poisoned arrow, refusing medical treatment until he knows who shot the arrow, what kind of wood it was made from, and whether the archer was tall or short. Meanwhile, the poison spreads, and the man dies not from the arrow, but from his obsession with irrelevant questions. This is why Buddhist practice doesn't begin with theology. It begins with a simple, undeniable observation. Life contains suffering. Not because God wills it, not because we've sinned against a divine law, but because of the very nature of existence itself. Sickness comes not as divine punishment, but as the natural result of having a body. Aging arrives not because we've displeased a cosmic judge, but because all phenomena are impermanent. Death approaches not as a consequence of moral failure, but as the inevitable conclusion of birth. When I first entered the monastery 30 years ago, I carried with me the same theological baggage that weighs down so many seekers. I had been raised to believe that every event, every joy, every tragedy was part of some grand divine plan. When my grandmother fell ill with cancer, I tortured myself trying to understand what God's purpose could be. When I failed my university entrance exams, I wondered if I was being punished for some unknown sin. When I fell in love and had my heart broken, I questioned whether God was teaching me a lesson about attachment. But as I sat in meditation day after day, watching the arising and passing away of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, I began to see something extraordinary. I realized that suffering didn't require a divine explanation. It required a practical solution. The tightness in my chest when I thought about my grandmother's illness wasn't there because God wanted me to suffer. It was there because I was clinging desperately to the fantasy that people I love should never experience pain, that life should conform to my desires rather than its own natural laws. This recognition was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant I could no longer blame God for my problems or credit God for my successes. Liberating because it meant I was no longer a helpless puppet in some cosmic drama, but a conscious being capable of understanding the causes of my suffering and taking responsibility for my own awakening. Here in our monastery garden, I often watch the ancient maple tree that stands at the center of our courtyard. This tree has weathered countless storms, survived drought and flood, witnessed the birth and death of thousands of smaller plants around its base. Does this tree need a creator to explain its majesty? Does it require divine permission to drop its leaves in autumn or to burst forth with new growth in spring? The tree simply follows the natural laws of its being, seeking light, drawing nutrients from the soil, responding to the seasons with perfect appropriateness. Buddhism suggests that human consciousness operates according to similar natural laws. When we understand these laws, the law of impermanence, the law of interdependence, the law of cause and effect, we can work with them skillfully rather than fighting against them in confusion. We don't need a divine lawgiver to make these laws real, just as gravity doesn't require God's signature to pull objects toward the earth. But perhaps you're thinking, if there's no God, then where do ethics come from? How do we know right from wrong without divine commandments? This question reveals one of the most beautiful aspects of Buddhist understanding. Compassion doesn't flow from obedience to divine commands. It arises naturally when we see clearly the interconnected nature of all existence. Let me share with you an experience that illuminated this truth for me. Several years ago, during our annual retreat, a fellow monk was struggling with intense physical pain from an old back injury. As I watched him grimace with each movement, something extraordinary happened. Without any thought of divine reward or punishment, but without any commandment telling me to help, I felt his pain as if it were my own. This wasn't sentimentality or emotional projection. It was a direct perception of our shared vulnerability, our common humanity. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of loving kindness and compassion as natural expressions of wisdom. When we truly understand that the boundaries between self and other are mental constructs, when we see that causing harm to others is literally harming ourselves, ethical behavior becomes not a burden imposed by divine law, but a spontaneous expression of clear seeing. The absence of God in Buddhism doesn't create a moral vacuum. It reveals the inherent wisdom and compassion that emerge when the mind is free from the distortions of fear, greed, and delusion. We don't need to be threatened with hell or bribed with heaven to choose kindness. We choose kindness because kindness is the natural response of a heart that understands the truth of our interconnection. But I sense another question arising in your mind, like mist forming over a still lake. If Buddhism doesn't require belief in God, does that make it atheistic? Am I becoming an atheist by following this path? This question troubles many sincere practitioners, and I want to address it with the nuance it deserves. Buddhism is neither theistic nor atheistic in the conventional sense. It's what we might call atheological, not concerned with theology at all. The Buddha didn't deny the existence of various gods and divine beings that were part of the cosmology of his time. In fact, Buddhist texts speak of numerous celestial beings, powerful spirits, and transcendent realms. But here's the crucial point. Even these beings, no matter how powerful or long-lived, are still subject to the same fundamental laws of existence as we are. They too experience birth and death. They too can suffer. They too must walk the path of awakening. What Buddhism rejects is not the possibility of powerful non-human intelligences, but the idea that any being, no matter how magnificent, could be the ultimate creator and controller of existence. This rejection isn't born from arrogance or rebellion, but from a clear-eyed recognition of the logical impossibilities inherent in the concept of an ultimate creator. Consider this ancient question that has puzzled theologians for centuries. Who created God? If we say that God has always existed, then we admit that something can exist without being created. But if something can exist without being created, why not the universe itself? Why not consciousness itself? The logical necessity for a first cause dissolves under careful examination, leaving us with a much more elegant understanding. Existence is beginningless, without ultimate origin, without first cause. This understanding brings with it a profound sense of freedom that I experience anew each morning as I walk through our monastery grounds. The dewdrops hanging from the spider's web don't owe their beauty to divine artistry. Their beauty is inherent in the interaction of light, water, and the spider's natural engineering. The song of the thrush at dawn doesn't require divine inspiration. It flows from the bird's innate nature, its biological programming, in its response to the returning light. Similarly, the capacity for awakening that exists within human consciousness doesn't require divine implantation. It's the natural result of awareness turned back upon itself, of consciousness recognizing its own fundamental nature. This is why the Buddha could promise with absolute confidence that anyone, regardless of their theological beliefs, could achieve liberation from suffering through understanding and practice. The monastery bell has just rung for our afternoon meditation, and its clear tone reminds me of another profound aspect of Buddhist non-theism. In many religious traditions, prayer is primarily petition, asking God for blessings, forgiveness, intervention in worldly affairs. But Buddhist meditation is not petition, it's investigation. We don't sit in meditation to ask for something from someone else. We sit to discover what is already present, to uncover the peace and wisdom that are our birthright as conscious beings. This shift from petition to investigation represents a fundamental change in how we relate to spiritual practice. Instead of positioning ourselves as helpless supplicants before an all-powerful deity, we recognize ourselves as scientists of consciousness, explorers of the mind's vast territories, archaeologists digging through layers of conditioning to uncover the treasure of our authentic nature. But this doesn't mean the path is easy, or that we walk it alone. While Buddhism may not recognize a supreme creator, it places tremendous emphasis on the three jewels: the Buddha as the example of what's possible, the Dharma as the teachings that guide our practice, and the Sangha as the community of fellow travelers who support our journey. These jewels provide all the guidance, inspiration, and companionship that human beings need for the spiritual path, without requiring us to believe in anything that cannot be directly verified through our own experience. I remember a conversation I had with a Christian monk who visited our monastery several years ago. He was a sincere and accomplished practitioner, and during our dialogue, he expressed puzzlement at how we could find motivation for practice without the love of God to inspire us and the fear of divine judgment to keep us on track. I invited him to sit with me in our meditation hall, to simply observe his breath for 20 minutes without any reference to God, Christ, or salvation. After the sitting, his face was radiant with a peace I had rarely seen. "I experienced something," he whispered. "A presence, a fullness, a sense of being held by something infinitely larger than my personal concerns. But it wasn't God as I usually think of God. It was more like the nature of existence itself, welcoming me home. This is precisely what Buddhist practice reveals. Not the absence of the sacred, but the presence of sacredness in every moment, in every breath, in every heartbeat. We don't need a supreme being to validate the mystery and wonder of existence. The mystery is self-validating. The wonder requires no external authority to make it real. As evening approaches and the shadows lengthen across our meditation garden, I'm reminded of one final aspect of Buddhist non-theism that I want to share with you. In traditions that emphasize divine grace, there's often an underlying sense that humans are fundamentally flawed, sinful, in need of salvation from outside themselves. But Buddhism begins with a radically different premise, that the capacity for complete awakening, for perfect peace, for boundless compassion, already exists within every conscious being. This isn't naive optimism or spiritual bypassing of our obvious limitations and destructive tendencies. It's a recognition that beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the habits of fear and grasping, beneath the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we need, there exists something unshakable, what we call Buddha nature, the innate potential for awakening. This Buddha nature doesn't require activation by divine grace. It doesn't need to be earned through good works or granted as a gift from a benevolent deity. It simply needs to be uncovered, like a jewel buried in mud, like the sun revealed when clouds pass away, like clear water discovered beneath the debris floating on a pond's surface. The practices of Buddhism, mindfulness, loving-kindness meditation, ethical conduct, wisdom cultivation, are not attempts to gain something we don't have, but methods for removing the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing what we've always been. This is why the Buddha's final words, according to tradition, were not a prayer to God or a plea for divine intervention, but a simple instruction: work out your salvation with diligence. Not pray for salvation, not wait for divine rescue, but work out your salvation. Recognize that the capacity for complete freedom from suffering lies within your own understanding, your own practice, your own dedication to truth. As we conclude our exploration today, I want to return to that young visitor who approached me with his fears about losing his soul if he didn't believe in God. After spending the day with us, participating in our meditation sessions, walking quietly through our garden, eating our simple meals in mindful silence, he came to me again as the sun was setting. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I think I understand now. I came here worried about losing my soul, but I realize I was looking for it in the wrong place. I thought my soul was something God had given me, something that belonged to Him. But sitting in meditation today, I felt something I can only describe as my truest self. Not given by anyone, not dependent on anyone's approval, not needing anyone's validation. Just present, just aware, just free. This is the gift of Buddhist non-theism. Not the cold emptiness that people fear when they imagine life without God, but the warm recognition of our inherent completeness, our natural wisdom, our birthright of peace, that no one can grant and no one can take away. The question isn't whether Buddhists believe in God, but whether we need to believe in anything outside our own direct experience to find the happiness, peace, and freedom that all beings seek. The Buddha's revolutionary discovery was that we don't. The path to the end of suffering lies not in the sky above or in the future beyond death, but right here, right now, in this very moment, in this very breath, in this very awareness that is reading these words. And perhaps that's the most liberating discovery of all, that the sacred isn't elsewhere, requiring our belief to make it real, but here, requiring only our attention to reveal itself in all its naked, immediate, undeniable presence.